Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Janson 841 Honey Processed Panama from Rose Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Rose, based out of Zurich, Switzerland. And they were originally a suggestion to us by Taylor Yan. So shout out to and thank you to Taylor for the suggestion. This is Rose's second ever appearance on this channel, having recently reviewed the Kagari AA, a wash processed Kenyan coffee that definitely exceeded my expectations. And while I typically don't like reviewing higher end coffees from coffee roasters I don't have a lot of familiarity with, this coffee was essentially picked by default, as I'd mentioned in our previous Rose review, that they offer a lot of heavier and experimental processed coffees. So this was one of the few non-washed coffees that did catch my interest. So we'll see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 34. And recipe we went with for this coffee was anywhere between 96 and 100 degrees Celsius, roughly translating to 205 to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So I had a lot of success with this coffee regardless of the temperature we went with. And that was at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio. And I did have a preference when it came to the brew method, as I definitely preferred the V60 on this coffee, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Now, roast profile for this one, I feel like the best way to articulate that is to compare it to a lot of the Janson coffees that we've reviewed from Manhattan over the years. And this one is not quite as light as those, but I feel like a lot of people would consider this to be on the very light side of things by most standards and metrics, so still a very light coffee in general. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and the cup did have a very strong sugary sweet aroma to it that was immediately present within the cup itself, as it had this strong citric-like grainy quality to the cup. And the best way I could describe it was this Fruit Loops-like aspect to it, and that's something I've discussed a lot with a lot of Panamanian geishas over the years, is that somewhat cereal-like quality to the cup, and this one was very vibrant, well-defined, and pronounced in general. And as a result, I was really impressed by this first impression, as it kind of took me aback for what my expectations were going into this one. Day 17, ran it through the Chemex, and it was pretty evident early on that I didn't necessarily enjoy this coffee as much through the Chemex, as it really seemed to kind of soften things in general. It didn't have the same sort of vibrancy and sweetness that the V60 had. It offered a little bit more of that citric base with slightly less sweetness to the cup. A bit more of the listed stone fruits were present, as well as some clarity, but just overall less vibrant, which wasn't necessarily my preference. Day 21, ran it through the April brewer, and the cup once again was just very pretty. A lot more of the cleanliness to the cup as it does cool down. It opens up in this white flower direction. Very nice, a lot of Panamanian geisha-like qualities to it. Yet again, with that sweet cereal grain, really enjoyed this coffee. Day 24, adjusted the recipe to higher temperatures, finer grind, and the coffee was just extremely easy to brew. So even with these adjustments, pushing the extraction, I just noticed that it continued to remain sweet and clean regardless. There was a slight bit more of the citric base, but you could feel the complexity of the stone fruits within this one, as it offered a wonderful peachiness in the finish. Complemented that with the Panamanian geisha-like characteristics I'd already had, and this coffee was turning out to be a real big winner, as yet again the Fruit Loops-like aspects were present yet again, with a fresh, sweet citrus fruit as well. Great complexity, really enjoyed this day. Day 28, attempted the same adjustments to the Chemex just to see if maybe that was what we were looking for, and it was just still more lively through the V60. So even with this, it was a better day compared to the first time we'd run it through the Chemex, as it did offer a slight bit more sweetness in general. However, it was still a little bit more tame relative to the V60, with a zestier citric quality to the cup that does increase a little bit upon the cooldown, but not necessarily to the same level as the V60. Day 31, final notes we have. Back to the original recipe, and the coffee was just still incredible nonetheless, as it offered an abundance of the Panamanian geisha-like qualities, with a lighter body, super clean profile, heightened citric sweetness, soft and delicate finish, an abundance of florality with a bonish peachy and nectarine component. Also, the cereal grain quality of that Fruity Pebbles Fruit Loop-like aspect is present yet again. More so upon the cool down, a very enjoyable cup from start to finish. Definitely still present here on day 34. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have 3 level 5s. So let's go through those real quick. And we'll start with the cleanliness level 5. Yes, and despite the fact that this is a honey processed coffee, and none of the clarity was taken away from this one, as so many of these aspects were extremely well defined that as you could kind of see through our notes, it was very easy to pick out a lot of the flavor profiles within this one. I do like maybe some of the subtlety and delicacy of Panamanian geishas, offering that in maybe a less pronounced manner. But given just how well defined these ones were and how sweet they were in general, I actually really liked the clarity in this one, especially for it being a honey processed coffee. Florality, level 5. Yes, the white flowers in this one, vintage Panamanian geisha, and I absolutely adored that about this coffee because they were also a little bit more sweet too. So that was a really nice selling point to me on this coffee. Citrus, level 5, yes, but that again is in that kind of citric grain quality component to this coffee, as once again, the first note I really picked out from this one was Fruit Loops, and the more I had it, the more I'm like, yeah, this cereal grain quality is present in it, especially in something like the V60, so that was a really nice aspect of this coffee too. We have a handful of level 4s, and we'll start with the finish. Level 4, yes, it does have maybe a little bit of a kind of delicate finish to it. It is a Panamanian geisha, even if it is a honey processed one. So that being there at the level 4, maybe about the expectation I would have. It's just really sweet in general, and that's where the sweetness comes into play at that level 4 mark. That's actually on the higher side of the level 4. It was a pretty sweet cup of coffee. I think the processing method did play a huge role in that, as some of the Janson coffees I've had in the past haven't necessarily been overly sweet. They've either been on the lower side of level 4, higher side of level 3, maybe not even necessarily reached that level 4 mark. So that was really nice about this coffee. Stone fruit, level 4, yes, and that's going to be a nice selling point to me as there was a lot of peachy aspects to it, but it was a very fresh fruit, stone fruit to this one. So at times I could say maybe something like a nectarine, and even in that sense it was ripe and sweet too, so really enjoyed that part of this coffee. Then we have a couple of level 3s that are worth discussing. Acidity level 3, yes, it's not necessarily the most bright coffee, which works perfectly fine for me. It's actually a little nice part of this coffee because I've never necessarily been the biggest fan of the brightness and acidity in this one, and this one didn't necessarily feel like it justified that level 4, even if it was on the higher side of the level 3. Caramel level 3, yes, that's because this coffee actually had so much candied sweetness to it, so that's typically where I like to put that in there to kind of show that it played a role in the rest of this coffee as well. And I think the final thing worth discussing is the body at level 1, because this one was still very light-bodied in general, and I think that may have been a little bit of a surprise to me, given that it was a honey-processed coffee and our preference was the V60. But I think that kind of goes to show why I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of the chemics for this one. Not only did it lack the same sort of sweetness, but the trade-offs you usually experience, more clarity and a slightly more delicate body, they weren't needed. The body was already delicate to begin with, and the clarity was already pretty high. So kind of sacrificing the sweetness for two things that were already in pretty significant note and abundance, not necessarily a huge selling point to me, but the way that this tasting wheel looks, I think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This one is actually one of the more enjoyable Panamanian geishas I've had in a little bit, and people know that Panamanian geishas are my favorite coffee in the entire world. I would say that it may not have necessarily been as good as the Firestone that we had from Apollon's Gold, but I mean, that one was the Best of Panama award winner, so that one was a truly special coffee. But even then, for a coffee producer, Janson, that I haven't necessarily been the biggest fan of, I was just really impressed by this one overall. It reminded me of what I like the most about Panamanian geishas in general, offering so much of those floral components, the sweet fruits, the sweetness, the clarity, just so many of those things that I really enjoy. And it shouldn't come as a surprise that this one was just my type of coffee, so that will kind of translate into the type of person I would suggest this coffee to. It's anybody that likes the same sort of Panamanian geishas that I do. So of course that's going to be your floral, fruity, sweet, and clear coffees in general. I feel like those are my big four, the four factors I always push forward and the ones I'm looking for the most in coffees, but most specifically when it comes to Panamanian geishas. So keep that in mind. I would say that citric grainy quality that a lot of people associate with Panamanian geishas, and that's really pronounced. Peachy aspect, also very pronounced. Floral aspect, also very pronounced. So those things all in pretty significant abundance. I'm not sure there are any negatives I would actually take away from this coffee. So if that's your preference, maybe if you don't like the lighter body, that might be the only thing that could deter you, but I think it would be a pretty good fit for you, and just kind of the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee or anything else from Rose, I'd love to know your thoughts or impressions of it, or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Janson 841 honey processed Panama from Rose Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.